Hey everybody, Bobby Medina here with my very dear friend Paul Barron. And today we have a very special guest who's been a friend of ours for quite some time, my good buddy John Snell. And in case you don't know John is part of the Reeves Company. But he's a fellow trumpet player. His education comes from many places. He's been to Cal State Northridge, studied at USC. He has played in various brass ensembles and as a freelance trumpeter over the years. But he is probably most well known for being a member of the Bob Reeves brass team since back in around 2001, I think.
Yep.
And after a long apprenticeship, John became the leading tech for their valve alignment services. And since then, he's worked on thousands and thousands of trumpets. And since his return from graduate school, he's also partnered with Bob in managing the shop. And you can hear John on his excellent trumpet podcast called The Other Side of the Bell. So welcome, John Snell.
Thank you, Bobby and Paul. But it's an honor to be here, and it's kind of weird being on the other side of the questions. So I'll be honest, I'm a little nervous.
No. You're the guy that's always asking the questions, but I'll let Paul throw the first question out to get the ball rolling.
Well, maybe that's a title that we should use, Bobby, The Other Side of the Question or something. We could start a podcast as well.
Other side of the bell, something like that.
That's right. Well, welcome, John.
Thank you.
We'll talk about mouthpieces, and I really want to talk about the alignments as well. But learning about your history and being part of the Reeves family, you've probably rubbed elbows and worked on horns and mouthpieces for the elite in the trumpet community and trombone as well. Do you guys do trombones? Okay. Yeah. So I'd love to hear some stories. We'd love to hear some stories about some of the amazing artists that you've worked with.
Well, yeah, thank you for the question. And it's now I'm going to think about who I've worked with, and we should probably have Bob on here at some point because he goes back to the 60s, even back to the Purviance days. Once it's safe to do so, we'll get Bob up here and have him tell some stories, at least the ones we can tell on the internet.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. A lot of my favorite players. Well, I can tell you, the first couple of weeks I worked at the shop, I was just answering phones. And actually, my first job was making lead pipe swabs. I was the one who actually tied them and burned them and all that stuff, put them in the bag and answering the phones. And a few weeks into working at the shop, but Doc Severinsen called. And many of you have met Doc in person. I mean, he's a good old boy. Bob Reeves Brass, this is John. Hi, John, this is Doc Severinsen. And my first instinct was, my dad's a trumpet player. And my first instinct was, my dad is prank calling me.
Oh,
and man. But it's like, I'm new to this job. I know people, Bob has a big clientele, a lot of big names, so I better not. So, and if anything, if it is my dad, I'll pass it on to Bob, pass the call on to Bob, and then my dad can have to talk his way out of it. But sure enough, it was Doc, and they started talking mouthpieces and then pasta recipes and all of that kind of stuff. So Doc is one of my heroes, and been fortunate to work with him. Arturo's been through the shop a number of times. John Faddis. Those are when, I've been here. Roger Ingram, Charlie Davis, of course.
I ran into Charlie there one day with all you guys. Yeah.
And now we carry his instrument, so he's up a lot, which is great. Bill Bing, as a matter of fact, was just in the other day. In fact, when you called, Bobby. So
Chuck Finley. Chuck Finley,
of course,
been in there.
Yeah, Chuck has been a customer since he was 16 or 17. The list goes on and on. Certainly all of the studio players in LA, Malcolm McNabb, Warren Looning, Rick Baptist, the Finleys, Jerry Hay, Gary Grant, Larry Hall. I'm sure I'm forgetting all of them, but orchestral players certainly have all come in. New York Phil, Vacchiano. There's a great story of Vacchiano Bob tells back in the Purviance days. Bernie Edelstein. It's kind of a trumpet player's heaven as a trumpet player myself, because I can go through our database and see Håkan Hardenberg came in when he was in LA the first time. Sergei Nikaryakov came in. I mean, it's a who's
Wow,
who.
that's pretty big time players, all those guys.
Yeah, and there was one point when I said, Bob, like, have you worked with everybody? You know, and we were sitting having lunch together, and I said, like Louis Armstrong, right? And he's like, yeah, actually, I made some of his last mouthpieces when I was working at Proviance.
Wow.
Like, you got to be kidding me. So yeah, it really is cool, and it's, you know, it's fun name dropping, but it's what's cool about working here is Bob will give the same level of detail he'll give a Doc Severinsen to a high school student. In fact, a lot of our customers will call and say, hey, I remember when I was in the old shop in Hollywood and Doc came in to get something, and, you know, Bob actually shooed Doc out the door so he could work with me, you know, things like that. And so it's cool to work with those players personally, but also we're the kind of company that if you came in for your first mouthpiece and you're 16 or 17, or you're a comeback player, we'd still give you that same level.
Yeah, no, I
detail.
think you guys have an absolute stellar reputation. I mean, years ago, the first time I walked in, that's exactly how I felt. I never felt rushed, you know. Bob even came out a couple times to listen, let me listen. And he turned around and I'll listen. And, you know, yeah, that's not my mouthpiece. I can tell the sound of my mouthpieces. And I remember he just took a hand tool and just reamed this thing ever so slightly, but it was just the right touch on this mouthpiece and made it sing for me. So yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So what are, you know, without giving any trade secrets away, what is it that makes Reeves Mouthpieces unique and special?
Yeah, and it's a combination of things that I've worked real closely, obviously, with Bob. So I wished I could have been there in the 60s when he was designing and, you know, learning with Carol Proviance, who he apprenticed with. It's a combination of things. One, Bob always says you have to know acoustics, right? You have to understand the acoustics of the instrument, which as trumpet players, some of us learn it, some of us just ignore it completely, which is fine. You know, it's not one way is better than the other, but I think it's helpful to know as a player what's actually physically going on in your mouth, in the mouthpiece, and in the instrument to an extent, right? But as an instrument designer or as a mouthpiece designer, you have to know the physics of what's going on. You have to know acoustics. You have to understand the standing wave and what affects it. So that's number one. Number two is you have to be a darn good machinist, because, I mean, you could make a mouthpiece that plays good, but can you make a second one that's just like it or as close as humanly possible? And there's a lot of people that are playing on mouthpieces and then they go to buy another one. They play a 3C and they go to buy another 3C and it doesn't play anything like their first one. So I think to do well in this business, you also have to understand the machining side of things, which Bob's upbringing was, he was a U.S. machinist in the U.S. Navy, and then he apprenticed it as a tool maker in China Lake, which for those of you who aren't in the machining world was like the highest tech military machining center in the world out here in California. And he was making on manual lathes with slide rules back in the day, you know, making parts that were going on Sidewinder missiles and going on rockets that were going up to the moon or in satellites and stuff. So that's the kind of background he brought to making a relatively simple trumpet mouthpiece. Mm-hmm. So acoustics, machining, and then the third is then I think the most critical, and that's musicianship. You have to hear. You have to know what the trumpet sounds like. You have to hear music, the colors and the sound, be able to describe the sound more than bright and dark or loud and soft. And that's something, again, Bob is an amazing musician. He doesn't play anymore and hasn't played for years, but he brought that to the table. You know, he could pick apart someone's sound and describe it to the nth degree. And that's something that he's trained myself and Brett and the others here how to do. So it's not just that we're making stuff. It's when you come in and play, like Bobby, your experience, he heard something in your sound, you know, and then he could use that, what he heard, and translate into an adjustment to make. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. I've always been curious why each of the model mouthpieces has a different, like of the stock line, has a different contour of rim.
Yeah, and that goes to Bob originally starting out as a custom shop. He opened up. He didn't have any intention of doing a stock line of mouthpieces. He figured there was Bach and Schilkes and others that were popular at the time. And he didn't. He just wanted to alter them or thread them or do custom work or do things completely by hand. And what ended up happening is he was making the same alterations. People were coming in with Bach mouthpieces and they were too sharp, especially for the studio players that are playing 12 hours a day. It was cutting into them. So he was always softening the bite or rounding them out a little bit. And people started asking for the same thing over and over again. So then the line developed from there. Some of it from the Proviance line and some of it of Bob's own design that then people started asking for again. And then he got more popular. So then the production started happening. So it's kind of like a thing. If you had started day one with, okay, this is our numbering system, this is how it's going to be logical. It would make our life a whole lot easier now, especially if we get on eBay something, well, this is stamped 3D345. What does that mean nowadays? Well, so that's why. So, like our 40 rim is like a 10.5C, but a little bit more cushion. The 41 was like a 7C at the time, but had a little different nuances and so forth. So it's really because he didn't set out to start with a line. He just kind of developed organically.
I know that when I came in, it was kind of the issue was the rim really for me. I hadn't found a rim that I just absolutely loved. And I fell in love with the 42. And at the time, I think you or Bob had told me that's like the most popular rim that the company's ever made. Mm-hmm. And after time went on, a number of years later, probably about maybe a little over a year ago, I didn't want to go to a 43. 43 is just too wide for me. But you told me about half sizes, which I had never known about. And so I switched to a 42.5 rim. And I found that it gave me it's basically the same feel on my face, but it gave me just a little bit more room in there to move around and be able to play in the lower register smoothly, especially like on an S cup. I mean, if I have a C cup, it's not a problem, but on the S cup for me, it's getting around down there can be a little tricky. And I'd like to try to get the biggest sound I can. What is the difference in like a half size like that? Is it a difference in the contour or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, well, it's the same contour, just a little bit larger. So it's one of those things where, I mean, we have a million options that we can do here. And in our literature and what we offer to our dealers, there's only so much we can put in there. Otherwise, trumpet players would go crazy, which may be a good thing. We might sell more mouthpieces that way if we had more options. But we try to find that balance of offering enough stock sizes to fit most players. And then like yourself, Bobby, after you've been playing on something for a while, you're like, okay, well, I'm kind of in between sizes, or, then we can get down and fine tune even more. And that's if you don't have a rim from another maker that you like, and you said something, you said the word love with your rim, and that's something we always stress. We don't want you to find a rim that you like. We want you to find a rim that you love, because that's what's contacting your face. That's what's doing the hard work, hours and hours a day. So you want to be 100% comfortable, like your favorite pair of slippers or shoes with that rim. And sometimes it's one of our rims. Sometimes it's an alteration like yours, the 42.5, or sometimes it's us threading someone else's rim and using that, because that's that critical juncture.
So in Bobby's case, would that just change the diameter then, and then you blend it to what you've already got, or does it change the whole volume of the cup and everything? Like, is everything a half a size?
It's going to depend. Okay. Like if it just a half a size is a few thousandths of an inch. So the way Bob's rims work is, the 40 stands for 40/64ths of an inch, which for those in the metric can't stand that. And those who want to do math, I never remember what the 620, 640, whatever the actual thousandths of an inch, but it's just shorthand for 64th of an inch. So basically we're shifting it over a 1/28th of an inch, which is enough that you might feel a difference. Some players, it might even be so close they don't.
I can tell you that it lines up perfectly with the 42 rim. I didn't have to change anything but it's just a feeling. I mean, it actually feels like the 42 rim as well. It didn't feel like I was making a rim change, but there's just this tiny little bit of extra room that it just allows, me to vibrate a little bit more in there. So
yeah, so it'll be the same contour as a regular 42, just shifted over a few thousandths of an inch, and then the cup depth. I mean, we try to keep as many variables the same as possible, right? Because with any equipment change, if you change multiple variables, if it works, great, you got lucky. But then if you go to do it again, you don't know what variable actually got you the result. And then worst case scenario is if you change too many variables and it plays worse, how do you back up? Well, was it the cup depth? Did the hole change? Did the cup volume change? So just, we know your mouthpiece works. The 42 just needed a little bit more room. So let's shift that rim over a little bit. Contour is great. Everything else so far is great. So yeah, it's trying to take as practical and almost a scientific approach in equipment change as possible. So,
well, let's talk about something else that a lot of people want to know about here in our group. And there's, we've been talking about the gap. People have made little references to the gap. And I know I have a complete or fairly extensive, not a complete, but a fairly extensive set of sleeves. And why don't you talk a little bit about that briefly? I think that's a great thing to educate people on, because this makes a big difference as well.
Huge difference. And thank you for asking. And I'll try to keep it brief as possible. And you mentioned you don't have a complete knowledge. We don't have a complete knowledge of what the gap does. And Bob's been doing this for 40 some odd years and has the patent on the sleeve system and basically revolutionized how much you can fine tune trumpet equipment using the gap. Kind of just going to basics, the gap is the distance between the end of the mouthpiece and the beginning of the lead pipe in a trumpet, right? There's that little space in there where the mouthpiece goes in the receiver, but it doesn't butt up perfectly with the lead pipe. And theoretically, a horn would play the best with no gap, but I think for a few reasons. One, we're used to playing with gap, and also it's really beneficial to dial in resistance. I think it's great to have at least some gap. And something that you can do, and we have a cool video on the Bob Reeves YouTube channel on doing the paper trick. Basically, play your mouthpiece in your horn, play over the comfortable range of the horn, play an exercise, play an etude, whatever. Mouthpiece in the horn is normal, and then take a small slip of paper and put it, there we go, Paul, lengthwise.
I'll do it as you're describing it.
Yeah. So put your piece of paper lengthwise along the mouthpiece. Don't wrap it around, lengthwise like that, and then put both the paper and the mouthpiece into the receiver. Now the paper you're using, Paul, is probably going to be a little bit too wide, but you can see it clearly. You only want maybe 1/8 of an inch wide. Doesn't matter how long it is because it's sticking out of the horn.
So you're talking about this width here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I can, let's see, I have a little Post-it note here. I can kind of show you. And what that's going to do is that's going to increase the gap a little bit. See if you can see this. Huh. Yeah, that's a little bit better.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can kind of see on my shank here.
So it barely, like the width of the shank kind of thing is what I'm seeing. Okay, great.
Yeah, and the reason why is the further around it goes, the further it's going to pull the mouthpiece out. So you want to start with just a small increment. Play that exercise again, play the etude again, and see if you notice a difference in slotting, in projection, in intonation. The gap can adjust any of those things. It's an acoustical phenomenon because it's creating a small bore change right at a critical spot in the entire mouthpiece and horn system. Actually, I should say player mouthpiece and horn system. And at that spot, especially in the upper and lower registers, stuff happens in there and we don't know what's going to happen. I see 1,000 players a year and I can't tell you what gap they need. I can't tell you what sleeve they need. And if I did tell you what sleeve you need, run the other direction, because there's no way to account for every variable in the instrument, in the mouthpiece, and most importantly, how you like to play, what resistance you like to feel. And that's something that the optimal gap will dial in for you. So it's funny because the gap in the last 10 years has really taken off, which is great because we have a lot of players that are now feeling more comfortable with their setup and thinking less about their equipment and thinking more about music. But to think that Bob's been doing this since 1971, 1972, there's a lot of theories out there that kind of just are misinformed. You need to have an eighth inch gap, because Bach or somebody said an eighth inch gap is optimal. And that's just not true, because no two trumpets are alike, right? No two mouthpieces. I don't care how great you make a mouthpiece. No two mouthpieces are alike, and no two humans are alike. Paul, you probably like a different blow than I do. And Bobby, you're probably like a different feel than both of us do. And that could mean that we're on a different optimal gap.
Well,
so
and
the best way to do is to experiment with it.
Well, and this is a point well taken, because if you switch horns and you switch gear, it's almost like you got to start all over with another mouthpiece sometime. Not every time, but sometimes. I've found that one horn, like I might play, like I said, I'm playing a 42S with a standard back bore on it on one horn. And if I have another horn, I might want to have the 6/9 back bore. It might make just a complete, things work for me. And then for me, what's been strange on my particular horn, the one that I use the most, the number 4 sleeve, which I think is the standard shank length that they're made at anyways, is
for
the
ours,
one that always works the best for me on Reeves mouthpieces. So I feel like for what I got, usually I do have a couple that require sleeves, but for the most part, the other ones that don't require, I don't need it on my horn. It always just seems to be the best fit for me.
Yeah, and it's something that it's the paper trick is a great experiment, because it's something that you can do with your students. If you're teaching, it takes 2 minutes, and the worst thing that can happen is you don't notice a difference, in which case you throw the paper away and you get back to practicing. But I mean, we've seen it from everything from, an intermediate to advanced high school players to comeback players. I mean, you don't have to be the top world touring artist to notice the difference. And a lot of the practicing that we do, well, I should back up a second. I mean, the whole point of any equipment change is to improve your efficiency, improve, how much time do you have to practice and what can you get done? Do you want to spend that time overcoming your instrument, or do you want to have that time working on what you personally need to work on fundamentally or musically? And if there's something like a paper trick gap change that can instantly improve your articulation or your slotting or those notes that you had to use alternate fingerings on, like that's saving you over the course of a year of practicing, sometimes hours, if not weeks of time. And if you count that over years of time, I mean, time is our most precious resource. And that's when those kinds of little equipment changes that it's awesome to see on our end. Players like, hey, I didn't know I could do this. I've been practicing for years and I haven't been able to get this note to slot in. And all of a sudden I put a piece of paper in, and instantly in 2 minutes, I can get that note to slot, things like that. So it's a cool little trick to do.
Yeah, I think it's great. It helps with your intonation. It helps with other things. But now that you said that, I'm going to bring something else up, because people, us as trumpet players, I'm going to speak for myself. I always feel like it's always me. It's always me. God, what am I not playing right? Am I not practicing enough? Blah, blah, blah. And I had this issue, and I'm going to transition it right here into another thing that you guys do, because this was my personal experience. But what happened in my case was on my horn, I just noticed that my low register got really unfocused, cloudy. And no matter how much I would practice, and no matter, even if I went to a bigger mouthpiece, it was not working. And I know you mentioned getting a valve alignment for like 2 years to me. And I'm thick-headed sometimes, and I was, you hear stories and, about this and that. And I was a little concerned with, maybe taking a little bit of metal off my horn or whatever. But ultimately, I realized by playing other horns, it wasn't me. There was something wrong with my horn. So you guys took it, and you didn't actually do the alignment for me. I came in real late in the afternoon one day, and Brett did it, and he stayed after hours for about another hour, an hour and a half, because it needed so much work to be done on it. but boy, did it make a massive difference in the evenness of the way it played. The intonation has never been better. It basically never played better. I mean, it actually played better than new for me. When I had this done. So I'm definitely a believer, but I know you're the guy that really does a lot of these and knows a lot about it. So why don't you tell people about the process and what it does, explain it.
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad you had that experience. And it's interesting. I think we're similar, Bobby. Like you and a lot of trumpet players are saying we fear change. There's two things that happen. We want to blame ourselves, right? Which is a good thing. You want to make sure you blame yourself first. You're not the clarinet player or the oboe player that's always looking at the reed whenever you squeak or miss a note. So there's something to be said for, wanting to internalize issues you might be having with your playing and not blaming it on the equipment. And then also fearing change. And I was in the exact same boat you were. The difference is I was actually working here. And I was telling people about the alignment on the phone, and I was, I don't think I was doing them yet. It was the first 6 months or so I think I was working here, but I was getting ready for my recital at Northridge, and I was practicing in the front room here, actually this very room, practicing my piccolo piece, Bright Seraphim, for my recital after work one day. And it was just Bob was hanging out, talking on the phone and doing emails, and I was up front practicing. And right in the middle of one of my run-throughs, the door opens here and Bob walks in and says, "John, I can't listen to you practice." It's like, and I still to this day have the fear of God with Bob. I mean, he's Bob Reeves, right?
Yeah.
But certainly I was young and I've only been here 6 months, and to walk in, he grabbed the piccolo out of my hands and said, "John, you're killing yourself. I can hear you struggling with the instrument." And I said, "Well, Bob, I have a recital in like a month, 6 weeks out. I don't want to change anything." And he's like, "Trust me, I can put it right back to where it is, but you'll have a lot better recital, at least as far as the piccolo goes. You're not going to be fighting the instrument as much." So I said, "Okay, I'm working here. I trust the guy." So he went back, he did the alignment for me, brought it back out, and it was a different instrument. And all the things you talked about, Bobby, the intonation, the evenness, to me, I was using all kinds of false fingerings, and I thought, okay, I don't have the chops. I don't know how to play piccolo. I haven't put enough hours in. I had a whole list of things, some of which were probably true, but I was spending so much of that time overcoming the piccolo, and I was failing at it. I was only doing so much. And once the valves were where they were supposed to be, where the instrument maker had intended them to be, all of a sudden I could blow naturally, and the music that I wanted to make in my head came out. And so funny enough, after that, I had all of my horns that I was using on my recital aligned over the next few weeks, because I figured if that works, so I had my B flat, my C, I used a cornet. I did a Herbert L. Clark thing. So I did my cornet, I had my E flat aligned, and not one of those horns played worse, and every single one of them played markedly better. In fact, my E flat ended up becoming my favorite horn. So that's my own personal experience. I'm not here to talk about the alignment because it's something we make money on, or it's like a voodoo thing. It's like, we believe in the results, and Bob believes in the results. And the reason why he came up with the alignment, let's say he didn't come up with it, the reason why he discovered its importance was he was having the best players in the world coming into his shop in the early days, day after day or week after week, for mouthpiece adjustments. Players like the Condolis or Doc, the Finleys, things like that. And okay, these players are playing 12 hours a day. They're some of the best players in the world. The mouthpiece adjustment he made a week ago, the mouthpiece is not different. The player's not different. What's going on? And he realized that the players were playing so much, the pads in the instruments were changing over the course of a week, so much so that the response of the instrument was changing. Therefore, that's why they came in to change the mouthpiece. So they were trying to fix everything in the mouthpiece, thinking that the horn was just the horn. And so that led to a process of discovery. First, see if there's a better pad material that's more stable. And then he realized that he just kind of assumed that the horns were kind of in a good place anyway. And after he started measuring and figuring out good ways to measure the instruments, that the horns were in some instances not even in the right ballpark of having the holes in the valves lined up perfectly with the holes in the pistons. And he started his hearing actually got better. His became more acute, where he could start hearing differences in the valve combinations that we as trumpet players think that we like to be able to hear, but not even to that level. We are so many times subconsciously adjusting for the sound we have in our head that we're not even noticing if a different valve combination is producing a different timbre or a different response, things like that. So that was in the early 70s. He started the process. We're still developing it. We're still trying to find ways to improve it. But basically, it comes down to getting a very stable pad material that, instead of lasting a few weeks or a few months at best, is going to last 5 to 10 years. And then also correcting the actual vertical positioning of where it should be of the holes, so that the up and down strokes are where they're supposed to be. And there's some great instrument manufacturers out there, and they're putting out some of the best instruments ever made. But unfortunately, that vertical positioning is kind of the last thing they think about. So it's off enough. I can get into more detail, but I suggest people call us, getting into the nitty-gritty numbers. But the difference between a medium and a large bore Bach trumpet, for example, is 8 thousandths of an inch, about 3 human hairs. We often see production horns, boutique horns out 15, 25, 30 thousandths of an inch, 40 thousandths. We're talking 5 times the difference between a medium and large bore instruments.
One of my valves I will never forget, because you gave me the card after what it had, and one of them was off by 32 thousandths, and you said that's a lot.
That's a 32nd of an inch. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's a huge, and I don't want to say it's a blowing difference. I mean, the feel is going to be like a muffled blowing difference, but it's an acoustical phenomenon. It's basically bore changes in a second critical spot of the horn. Without giving you an acoustics thesis, the most critical spots of an instrument is the first inch or few inches, the last few. So we're talking about the mouthpiece and the gap and the opening of the lead pipe, the bell flare, and then halfway through, which is going to be the valve cluster. So any small bore changes or dents or things in those areas are going to drastically affect the acoustical performance of the instrument, which means the response, the intonation, projection, sound colors, all of that stuff. So that's why you can get a dent in one of your little crooks of your slides, and it may or may not affect how it plays. But if you get a little dent in the flare of the bell, or again, we change the gap a few thousandths, or the valve is off a little bit halfway through, you're going to notice the horn doesn't play right.
So do you ever get stock horns in, and you or Bob or Brett or whomever will look at it and go, you know what, let's leave it alone? Or do they all generally need, to varying degrees, some sort of alignment?
I'm not a gambling man, but if I were, I would bet that just about any instrument would need it. And here's why. I've done, I don't look at this often, but I was over 10,000 alignments last year. And I can count on one hand how many of those horns, and those are alignments I've done. I've probably measured another 500 to 1,000 horns at conferences and things where people were thinking about it. So I've measured a lot of horns. Less than 5 were actually close. So let's say close is under 8 thousandths of an inch on all 6 valve positions on a 3-valve horn, upstroke and downstroke, first, second, third. There's 2 or 3, and it's interesting, of those that I measured, we typically say, okay, you're not going to notice a big playing difference in those horns. And so I don't know if it's worth the investment. However, we've still, of those people that we measured and they were close, we still had 2 or 3 of those that ended up doing the alignment because they wanted it to stay there, because they had 5-cent cheap felt pads in there that who knows what those measurements of those pads are. And if they were to ever lose those pads or get them wet, or in 3 months, they would have to bring the horn back to align anyway, because the pads have compressed enough that the alignment's going to be out where it's going to adversely affect the performance. So it's very rare that we get a horn that's not worth doing. Kind of the flip side of it is, if the horn's so far out and the player really loves how the horn feels, then we have to have a talk. Because I don't want to say we've run into issues. There's a famous story that Bob loves to tell that I'll leave for Bob. But we've undone a few alignments for players. And for the most part, it's because the horn was way out of alignment and the mouthpiece that player was using, they were using to compensate for the horn being really choked down, right? So the horn plays really stuffy because the alignment's out, player's using a drilled out, bored out, huge backbore mouthpiece. And then all of a sudden we open the horn up and the player falls in. And there's arguments both ways. Well, if the customer is comfortable that way, then leave it. And we're fine with that. You know, we go with results and what the customer wants. However, it's a very inefficient way to play. If you're struggling because of the horn's not where it's supposed to be, you should really adjust the mouthpiece to something more easier to play and open the horn up and find that balance, you know, dialing it in with a gap. But some players don't want to mess with the mouthpiece, and that's fine. It's understandable. So in rare occasions, we've had to, you know, players like, well, I don't really like how this feels. And we either have a conversation about, okay, let's dial in, let's balance that resistance now that we've taken away, or we just put it back to the misaligned state that it was before and send the player on their way. And it's interesting, the few of those that we've done, we've had 2 of those people even send the horn back again to realign it. Because they did the alignment, they weren't sure, they think they liked the way it played before, so then they sent it back to us, we undid the alignment, and then they got it back and they said, oh yeah, I see how uneven this feels now. I did like it better in the alignment. So then they sent it back and we realigned it again. So,
well, that was kind of the selling point for me when you finally just said, you know, Bobby, if you don't like it, we'll just put it right back for you. And there's no problem, you know. And I always love that about you guys. And I always love that there's never any arm twisting or anything. It's just really about the player that comes in, about their experience and trying to truly help them. And I think that's a big part of why you guys have been so successful, and, you know, having you on the front lines many times, but kind of be in the face of the company. I mean, I think you do just a stellar job of it. So.
Well, thank you. And I mean, that means a lot. I'm doing my best, but it comes down to Bob's principles. And I don't want to say we've gotten into trouble, but I mean, we believe in the alignment, as you can hear me talking about it. Just like if you go to a trumpet teacher and a trumpet teacher says, you know, you need to buzz your mouthpiece. Is that going to work for everybody? You know, we can argue about that all day.
No, exactly.
Talk about mouthpiece buzzing. Talk about a controversial subject. So, you know, players say, hey, they come in and they want a mouthpiece. And we want to educate them and say, hey, you're going to buy a lot of mouthpieces if your horn is in this condition. You know, the 4 feet of brass is always going to win. You know, if the 4 feet of brass isn't right, the mouthpiece, the 3.5 inches of mouthpiece, is never going to be able to completely overcompensate or compensate for the inefficiencies in the instrument. So yeah, people have called us and said, hey, I want a Reeves 42S, and we'll say, well, have you had your valves aligned? And that can turn some people off, but it's really in our own, you know, the player's own best interest that we're at least educating them and say, hey, this is what works. Customers that get the alignment have bought less mouthpieces from us because they've settled. They know how the horn's supposed to play. They're able to more effectively dial in the mouthpiece. And a lot of times, even the mouthpiece that they had lying in the drawer that didn't work before, all of a sudden lights up now. And they have that uncomfortable call. Say, hey, John, I don't need a mouthpiece anymore. It's like, great, play whatever you're using. We go with results. So if you're happy, go with it.
And I like that about you guys too. Even Bob, you know, it's like, you know, if you're getting better results from the other piece you were playing or whatever, you know, stick with that. It's never about, you know, I mean, it's like you realize, just like you were talking about you know, we're all unique as individuals. So for some people, they can buzz a mouthpiece, you know, for warm up for 45 minutes on a mouthpiece and play phenomenally. And there's other people that never, ever have to do it. And so it's kind of whatever works for you. But, you know, one of the things that we do all the time, Paul and I, when we're helping, working with students or helping educate people, is trying to teach them how to experiment and show them what the process is, the thought process, and how to go about doing that. Because without any experimentation, you'll never find what your true potential is and the potential of the instrument. And I think a lot of people go, and certainly for me, I don't know about you, Paul, but you could even maybe talk about that too. But for me, learning to play trumpet, it was like whoever I was taking lessons from, it was gospel. And that's exactly what I did. No matter what I'm doing, I'm not getting better, but I know I will some year, you know. And just sometimes you just got to think, go to another teacher, hang with other friends, figuring out, what works for you and stuff. I mean, did you find that too as students?
Well, for me, I guess I was fortunate in that I didn't have very good teachers when I started out. So I didn't have anybody that was really dogmatic in one way. My first teacher, for instance, was that worked at a little teeny music store and was a piano teacher. And my parents came in to rent a trumpet. So, they said, well, we should get him lessons because I was 6 years old and you don't start in school, for years to come. So they said, well, geez, we got this guy over here, he could teach you. And okay, fine. So it was a tune of the day. And all the assignment was practice this song and come back next week. Okay. Well, now I got Mary Had a Little Lamb. Now what? Okay. The next song. That was it. It was nothing about the trumpet, about how to blow. In fact, he didn't know how to put the valves in the right ports, So I wasn't messed up, I guess, by any of that dogmatic approach. How about you, John?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of the exact opposite. I had some of the world's best teachers that I I'm just
Well,
was too dense to get.
your father is a tremendous
Yeah.
player, so that's
And
like
that's yeah. So
would be a
yeah.
dream for me.
Yeah, and my father and still is an amazing player and arranger, Keith Snell, for those of you watching, and he may be watching this at some point. So he was well connected in LA, and so my first teacher was Bill Bing, which a lot of, yeah, I think I was in 8th or 9th grade when I started studying with him, and I mean,
One of mine
most
too.
trumpet players in the world are not
Right.
fortunate to have a teacher like that at that kind of an age. And I wished I could say I was mature enough to understand what he was saying and take it. And I wasn't. In fact, I went back to him to study later to have another chance with him to get more. And I'm so glad I did. But I learned from Bill. He was taking lessons from Bobby Shue. Here's Bill, an established great player, and he was taking lessons from Bobby Shue and Timothy Dockschitzer, whoever was coming into town. And I was like, wow, why is my teacher taking lessons? And so I had this early concept of never stopping learning, and I got that from Bill. Bob Karen, who's another fabulous player and teacher from Juilliard, and he was studied with Arnold Jacobs. So learning breathing from him. Charlie Davis in college, getting into the atom thing and going a whole different direction. That was me rebelling from my dad as a classical player. I was like, I'm going to learn to play commercial music and play loud and high and that stuff. And with Charlie, but so, I mean, kind of integrating all of that stuff. It's when Bob Slack, I mean, I mention all my teachers, but I was really fortunate. I was just too much of a mess. I never got my mindset correct, to relax and play. And now the stuff that I'm learning with Bob about the acoustics of the instrument, to not overplay the acoustics, not overblow, and how much tension can kill you. And I was just too much. I was a tense kid. So no
I think that's one of the biggest problems. And it certainly was the biggest problem that I had for years. I was playing on bands and people always wanted louder, louder, louder. And I'd practice loud. I played in a drum and bugle corps, played in marching band, everything. And I just came from this playing really loud background, and I could get a big sound, but my chops were always spread. They were always beat up, no finesse, all those things that go along with that. So you do need to learn to make your body work with the horn and not overplay it, like you're saying, and to find that balance. This is what the mouthpiece, this is what sleeves, the valve alignments and stuff get you to do, and really dial that in for you.
Yeah, and it's a perfect analogy. Well, there's a lot of great analogies with sports equipment, because we as musicians want to think it's us, and it is. We're the heroes that are going into battle. But if you're going to go slay a dragon, you want to have a decent sword and decent armor, right? We're there to help you. We're Tiger Woods Golf Club. We're the new suits that the Olympic swimmers are using to get them that extra half a second or a split second, whatever. I mean, you can use the technology, you can use the acoustic design to make your job easier. And again, if you're a young player and you're going into the job, going into a career in music, it's not any less competitive than it was, and probably a lot more so. And so you need a competitive advantage in a way. You know, you need to be able to do things. You need to be able to stick out on ways. And again, time is your most valuable resource. So if you're spending your time in the practice room because a second and third valve combination is not settling right, sure, go ahead and spend hours a week trying to settle that in, and you can do it. You can adjust your aperture. You can use chops to muscle stuff around, but you're that swimmer in the Olympic trials that's maybe a hair behind because you didn't use, you know, the new technology that makes you glide through the water faster, or that angle or titanium. What, I'm not a huge golf fan, so you guys can correct me, that, you know, whatever the next driver is it cheating, or is it using technology and science to get that ball, that first drive, to go 1 yard faster or 1 yard further? And that's going to help Tiger Woods. And it's also going to help me on the golf course, even if I can only hit 100 yards.
Yeah.
Because,
And well, it's just like, and nowadays you're not going to go into battle with a shield and a sword, you know?
yeah. Yeah,
as much
exactly.
as I like Vikings,
Yeah.
the series, you know, I just don't want to. I don't want to do that. Well, I know we're almost out of time, but let's shift gears here real quickly, because
I got one last question.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I've been wanting to ask this question,
Yeah.
John. So I know that you're able to set back, or that's probably not the correct term, but put back an alignment if somebody's not really happy with it. So for our viewers right now, anybody that's on the fence that is considering, and they're, you know, like Bobby took a couple years to warm up to the idea, and you did as well, John, and me too. So what is it that you do to put it back, or is that a trade secret? Like, I just, what I'd like you to do is let people know that they can feel a lot less anxiety about this. You know.
Yeah, I can't explain I mean, there are some trade secrets, but there's also, we're completely open about what we do and what the process is. And so I would welcome anyone to call or email me. And we do 30-minute free consultations. I mean, you're free to call anytime, but we're busy here, so I can't guarantee one of us is always going to be on the phone to be able to talk as long as we want. So we do offer free 30-minute consultations, and we can talk as much as we want during those. That's all available through our website. But
we'll make sure we post that here, right underneath here.
I'll give you all the links for that, because we try to be as accessible as possible. It all depends on the horn. And so we prioritize basically getting the horn to play the best it can, the least intrusive amount possible, you know, and also in the most practical way possible. And that takes a lot more into consideration than I think the average person is going to think about in alignment. Like, how stable is the surface that we're contacting? How even is the surface? Is the pad contacting a wide surface or a thin surface? Things like that. So we usually will trim parts that are easily replaceable, and or you don't even know. We're like a surgeon. First of all, we're never trimming the actual valve part itself where the holes are going through. That's like sacred territory. Some people think we go in and we bore out the ports in the valve. Like, we don't touch that part of the valve. What we are going to trim usually is parts on the stem, parts of the maybe the top of the spring barrel a little bit. You know, sometimes the top cap or the finger button in places that you're not even going to notice. Very rarely, and in some instances, we have to trim actual parts that you can see, but it's rare these days. Usually we have places we can cut or other ways to do it. That being said, so if we were to put it back, if we can move the valve up, we can move it down. So we can put it back. We can't obviously put metal back in place. However, we're trimming a few thousandths of an inch. We're not going in with a hacksaw and cutting half the valve out. We're moving it a few human hairs. And most clients don't even know that we've even touched their horn, other than they have new pads in there. So that's the thing. And we've done everything. I've done a few double-digit Bach horns. I've done Chicago Benjes. I've done all kinds of collectible horns that are meant to be used. So if you are going to use a horn and you're concerned about how it's going to play, then you can feel confident that doing alignment is going to make it play better. We're not going to, you know, like the old box, they have the serial numbers on the stems and in the caps. Like, we don't machine that stuff off. If there's things like that that's going to preserve some sort of the collectability of the horn, we pay attention to that. However, if you are buying a horn and it's an investment and it's going to go on eBay in 10 years, or it's your grandchild's, like, don't have us work on it. Don't have anyone work on it. Sit it in your closet. And by all means, don't play it, because playing a horn is going to ruin the collectability more than anything we're going to do. So if you're concerned about that, yeah, you have to think about, are you actually, Bob always says, is it a piece of jewelry or is it a tool? So if you're going to use it out on the job, you're going to get paid to do it, or you're doing it in your band and you want it to play the best you can, use it as a tool. If it's for eBay and for your your child's tuition, put it in the closet. Clean it first and then put it in the closet. So it doesn't, you pull it out in 10 years and all of a sudden there's red rot because you had a cheeseburger in there sitting there. So
Well, John, thank you so much for sharing your time, your day here with us. And we will make it a point to bring the master Bob Reeves himself. We'll have to do a happy hour hang with him.
yes,
And
we'll get him a pint of Guinness, and
there you go. And let's do that soon. But, thanks for all the, your insight on this thing, and just from me to you over the years, all your help and your friendship with everything you guys have done for me. I mean, I truly believe in all this stuff as well. I'm not trying to sell anybody on anything. It's just stuff that I've had done on my horn, and I know it's made a difference. And I think I think it would help a lot of people. So we'll make sure we put all the links in down there, and that people can reach out to you if they're interested in getting a little consultation and learning more.
yeah, awesome. Paul, Bobby, thank you so much. It's been my honor. And I hope I did okay. I was nerve-wracking being on this side of the questions.
No,
you guys did a wonderful job, and thank you for what you guys are doing with your Facebook group. It's what an amazing collection of wealth that you have up there. So it's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
All right. Thanks, John.